I'm going to introduce you to the basics on how to control the LED. So what I have here is the default template that I've given you. I've simplified it and deleted a lot of the things that we aren't really using, like the collision and all of that. But this should be the default file that you're able to download off of the Blackboard site. Now, if you've watched any of the other videos, you now know what all of this other stuff does. And what we're looking at now is how to actually control the LED, how to turn it on and off. So in its most simple state, the LED is controlled through what's called a digital output. It's essentially a switch at the robot that says turn the red light on, turn the green light on, or turn the blue light on, depending on which command you send it. And that's what's in these templates here. So these modules here are actually in the input-output programming, and it's a set or reset digital output. Now, digital output is simple. It's called digital because it's a 0 or a 1. 0 means off, 1 means on. And so what we're doing is we're toggling here with a Boolean toggle, true or false, to set this to 0 or 1. And when we set it to 0, it says the output that we get, if we're feeding this as an input into the digital output, this is essentially the name at the controller of the red LED. So we're saying LED, in this case we have it at false, so we're saying reset LED, red. Basically turn it off, set it to 0. This is the opposite. All right, so this actually turns it on. So all these modules do right here, this one plus this one plus this one plus this one, is generate this code. That's it. Nothing else really. So if I wanted to create the code for turning on the blue, let's see if I can do this real quick. I will just select all of these. This will turn on and off. Right? So I'm going to just do a copy and a paste. Right? So I would come down and change these to B, or let's just use G because it's in order. All right, but they're still hooked up, so you'll see what's happening here in a second. So I could do this one more time, and essentially I'd have the placeholders for turning on and off all three colors, which is what you'd want to do if you're starting to control all three of them. So now the question starts to come in, where and how do we insert these into the code? So let's look at what's happening with the code so we can get an understanding. All right, so if we look at this post processor, and if you watch that other video, you'll know that I did a merge here, and we took the motion path, the motion outputs here, and put them to the operations here. But you see that's not what's happening. All right, so let's use a panel to see what's actually going on. All right, so I'll take a panel and I'll feed my motion commands through here. So at this point, the post processor has generated the actual rapid, the code that's necessary in order to generate the programming for the robot to move. All right, so in this case, since we just have, oh my goodness, there we go, the motion output, we just have a list of all the commands that make it move from one point to another, and that's all that's there. When that gets fed into the quick task and with all of the other declarations, it creates the output here for the rapid. So when we're looking at the code, I'm going to try to make this smaller so we can look at it. For the rapid, you'll see there's a whole bunch of other stuff, right? And that's what all of these declarations and everything are. All right, there's a header that tells it the name and adds some other information, all of the declarations, which these are, and it actually declares each target and its coordinates in space and its location of the plane, all of that good information. So all of those that you see there, the const is a declaration of a variable. So it's basically saying define as a robot target this target named target 204 with these parameters. All right, so as I scroll down, those are all my declarations, and eventually I'll get past them, and I get to the beginning of the actual code, the procedure. So when we're at the controller running the robot, this is the code we see. None of that gets seen. That gets compiled when we load up the software, and we see it pause for up to a minute or whatever it takes. It's compiling all of this data and then showing us this data here. So when we move line by line, we move through this line, this line, this line, and this line. So in this case, you see we have the commands to set and reset. So the reset basically says turn off the LED in case it's already on, and set will turn it on. If you were paying attention to the programs we were running, this is actually not really doing that much, because it'll turn it off. If it's already on, it'll turn it off and then on instantly. So you don't really see any results from it. And often it's turned on a little bit too early. Like this actually probably wants to be turned on after it gets to the first point. Or if you're still using the code where Tyler put in this clearance point, you want it to go to the second point before it actually turns on. So how would we begin to do stuff like that? All right. So I already told you we have a list of motion code that comes out of here. If you look at this code, none of the LED commands are there, which is why we've taken this code and we've fed the motion code into an insert. This is just an insert list, an insert item list from Grasshopper. This is not a HAL code. And so what it takes is, let's zoom in a little bit, a list, which we're feeding all of these values here, right? It takes a value, an item, and it will insert it into this list at this point, at the index, at this index that we describe, right? So if we look at the makeup of a list, this is a list of data. So we have 0 through 413, which means we have 414 pieces of data, because 0 counts as 1. All right, so if I tell this to insert, let's move this here. All right, now we're looking at the output of this insert. So we're inserting at index 0, basically telling it at the beginning of the list to insert this data. So the data we have are these two code, the reset and the set. And these are based on the order in which it's fed, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So if I disconnect all of these, you see that we're feeding at 0 nothing. So we're getting kind of this almost an error, but not really an error. So if I'm feeding now the reset code, you'll see that show up at 0. All right. Now I can hold Shift and add the next item in the list, and it'll feed those two pieces of data there. And again, what I meant by the order is if I actually told it to set this light first, and then I fed the reset, what's actually going to happen is it's going to turn the light on and then off before it does anything. So you could get a mix-up just by accidentally feeding these two in the wrong order. Now the nice thing about the insert list is as I move this index, so let's say I really do want it to go after the second point. So I know that first point is that point, that weird point out in space. The second point is my actual code. So I want it to turn on once it's there. So I'm going to know it's going to move to the first one, second one, and then set the commands. All right, so I'm going to disconnect these because we got them in the wrong order, right? So we want it to basically turn off. Like good proper coding would tell it to turn off all the colors. So I would actually feed a reset R, G, and B before I set something on. In case any of them are already turned on, this would turn it off. Right? Even better code would be to set these at the beginning. So I could create another insert here. Let's just do it. All right. So I'd feed this list as an insert. I'd feed an index, a new index number, in this case 0. Telling it to, let's follow it here. Telling it to turn off all the lights. So I'd create one more for the B if I was doing this correctly. And that would essentially say, make sure all the lights are turned off before anything happens. I would then take this list and feed it into this other insert here. So I'm just adding one in the chain. So we're chaining these inserts together. So now I would feed this one here, and I'll see that I have the resets, but now I have to change the index because my list is different. So I'd have to move these further into the index, further down the list in order to get past those. Right? And I don't want these to be a reset. I would disconnect these and tell it to, let's just keep it simple and turn on the red light, which I would feed here. All right, so as we see, we're going to turn them all off, and then at the right point, in this case, we'll move it back. We want to move those 2 points. So we want 1, 2, 3, 4 is what we actually want here. All right, so move to those 2 points and then turn that light on. All right, and then what we're doing again now is now taking this list, feeding it into yet another insert list. So let's follow this one. All right, but in this one, we are setting the commands at the end of the list. So instead of having to count them, we use a component called a list length. So what this will do is take the number of items in this list and give you a numeric value. We are now using that numeric value to feed the index to now tell it to turn that light off once everything's complete. All right, so hopefully this starts to make a little sense, because what this allows you to do is now, if you were to begin to turn on the lights at the right points, is you have to begin to calculate, all right, at what point or what target do I need to turn the red off and the blue on in order to switch colors in the middle of the code. Now, the goal is not to figure out, okay, it's at line 492, and then I'm feeding 492. The goal is to use the grasshopper to your advantage. So however you're feeding that path and those points, you would get that index, that value from wherever those number of points ended. So let's say you had a sequence of points and that were a certain path, then you would find that value, feed that index, and then feed that list. And this is where the complication and the joy of grasshopper data handling come in. So figuring out how and where to insert these commands in that data is key. All right, so once I have it all set up, I'm now taking that list and actually feeding it into the operations, which then give me all of my control through the rapid output, the rapid code. And that's how you would begin to control the LED light as you're working.